Well, what the complaint alleges is that the Qatar Islamic Bank provided financial services to terrorist network organizations in a variety of ways, particularly two: Ahad al-Sham and the Al-Nusra Front, which were the two that held me captive. One of the ways they did this was they donated, allegedly, 500,000 rial to Qatar charity and gave them 8 bank accounts at their institution. Now, this charity has a long-standing history of financing terrorism way back to 1993 when bin Laden praised them for their contributions for his cause. This charity also, during the Syrian war, was a strong and public supporter of the Syrian Islamic Front. Now, that was a band of 5 rebel factions fighting together, the most prominent being Ahad al-Sham, and their commander at the time was Abu Khalid al-Suri, who was very widely known as al-Qaeda's key representative in Syria, sent personally by Ayman al-Zawahiri. That's one way. Another way that Qatar Islamic Bank allegedly helped finance terrorism was they allowed a guy named Al-Kabi to walk into their bank and open up an account under his minor son's name. Now, this bank account was later used by the Madid campaign, which he was widely known as being the head guy of. And they ran a very public social media campaign soliciting donations from all over the Middle East, not just Qatar, to finance the Al-Nusra Front. And many of these social media tweets and WhatsApp and YouTube and Facebook posts literally had Qatar Islamic Bank's name and the account number, which was funneling the money directly to Al-Qaeda. There are 2 senior-level Qatari government officials that have gone on the record. One was the Qatari ambassador to France, who said that this Madid campaign was shut down because it was known for financing terrorism. And I believe there was another high-level government official. The title is not coming to my mind, but it was definitely done. The account was open for over a year, which is truly astonishing considering how public their donation soliciting was. You're talking about, like I said, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. The campaign was so successful that Al-Nusra Front fighters literally made a thank you video standing in front of their black flag, armed to the teeth, thanking the Madid campaign for their contributions. I mean, that pretty much says it all in terms of how much money and help that they were getting. Sure, the bank had a very, very stern set of policies and procedures to make sure that nothing was done in their institution to finance terrorism, or supposed to be done. For instance, they had an obligation to know who their clients were, to know where their clients' funding was coming from. They had an array of procedures and guidelines in terms of wire transfers. Now, any wire transfer, 4,000 rial or more, was supposed to be immediately flagged. If you look at one of the social media posts, their flyer with the bank's name and the bank's account number says that it costs 5,500 rial to finance a fighter. So basically, that's $1,500 over the allotted flagging number. So yes, there are tons of guidelines where basically it's almost impossible not to know that this was going on. I do. I think when I get my day in court, the evidence is overwhelming and it speaks for itself. I was captured on New Year's Eve, 2012, and I was held for 7 months. And in that time, I was tortured, I was starved, I was locked in a dark room, infested with bed bugs, crawling all over me. I couldn't even delouse because there was no light sometimes. There were giant rats that would crawl on me in my sleep in one of the prisons. And when I wasn't personally going through that, I was listening to other people go through it all day, sometimes all night. I mean, I can't even give you an estimate on how many people I heard tortured. Myself, I was placed inside a tire around my knees, flipped over, and they used a thick cable to whack the bottoms of my feet 115 times to the point where I literally couldn't walk. I couldn't even feel my feet. And then after that, They locked me in a dark room for almost a month and a half and barely fed me. I mean, it was a horrific nightmare. At one point, I was locked in a room with 30 other prisoners, and a lot of them were, some were soldiers, some were Shabiha, some were Al-Qaeda prisoners that they arrested. And some of these prisoners, mostly the soldiers, became very good friends to me. Best friends I ever had, to be honest with you. And 13 of the 18 of them never came home. Nobody knows if they're alive. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Their families don't know if they're alive. And that's the hardest thing for me to live with, not the fact that I got tortured. It's the fact that I have these friends. And it's hard enough to lose a friend under any circumstance, but to just not know what happened to them, and to know that whatever did happen to them was just beyond horrific, you know, that follows you every day, every night, and it doesn't go away. Well, that was, the complaint alleges they had a Sharia supervisory board at the bank, and the chairman of the board was this guy, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. He's very famous. And he has a history of making anti-Semitic and just anti-American and just anti-human comments. He has praised Hitler for putting the Jews in their places. He has condoned suicide bombings in Israel. He has endorsed abductions of Americans and attacks on Americans in Iraq. And the fact that he was in such an elevated position within the bank with this history speaks volumes. And on top of that, the fact that today he's the chairman of the Union of Good charity, which is a Hamas-founded organization which basically funnels money to Hamas through charities, that speaks for itself.